The map found shows areas that no longer exist. On camera is a man speaking as he did then. What would you do if every year, on the same morning, he comes and says the same words? This is a story about a stream where someone is catching not fish, but time. And every time, the route starts with the same mistake. Franklin County, northern Maine. Thompson Creek is a small forest stream that is part of a system of water bodies that flow into Tebbets Lake. The place is remote, unofficial, without developed trails or signs. In recent years, almost no fishing has taken place here. The old wooden bridge that spanned the stream in the 50s had long since collapsed on one side. But locals still remembered it was on this bridge that they used to catch barbel and rainbow trout. In July 1990, a man named Ronald Kane, 48, was visiting his brother's house near Woods for the weekend. On Friday night, he was awakened around 4 a.m. by a distinctive sound, like someone was casting out a fishing line. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the sound kept coming. Line, movement, clicking, like someone fishing. But the bridge leading that way was abandoned, and the property was closed. In the morning, he decided to check. At 6 o'clock, 5, he reached the bridge. He saw that someone had indeed been there. An aluminum bucket stood on the railings, 3 freshly caught fish in it. One was still showing signs of life. Nearby was a wooden chair, its legs sunk into the muddy bank, as if someone had been sitting there and had not gotten up. Near the log was a neatly placed notebook in a square. No name, just the inscription on the cover. Thompson. Morning cycles. He did not touch the things. At first, he thought that the fisherman had simply gone away. But when he returned to the same place in the evening, everything was in place. Only the fish in the bucket were no longer breathing. And the notebook, leafed through by the wind, but not displaced. On the 4th page, there is a list of dates. The most recent one is 1707-90, but underneath it is a crossed-out line. The next one, 1707.85, same date, only 5 years earlier. And underneath it is neatly written, the bite started at 0441. The weather is the same as then. Ronald took the notebook to the local station. The officer on duty, Neil Jeremy, didn't take the situation seriously at first. But when he opened the last page, he froze. There was a neat sketch of the creek plan and a caption, John Ellis, fish line. Don't forget the car. Ellis, a name they knew here. He drowned in this creek exactly 5 years ago. It is believed that he slipped on the bridge, hit his head, and went under. His body was found 500 yards downstream. He had a habit of keeping a fishing journal. He always wrote in a square. And this notebook is new. The paper has no signs of aging. The ink is not faded. And the signature is his handwriting, exactly the same. Officer Jeremy, having received the notebook, first sent it for examination to the county lab in Bangor. He wanted to rule out a coincidence. Who knows? Someone local found Ellis's old notes and decided to joke. But already at the initial inspection, it was clear. The paper was new, bought recently, not yellowed. The smell of fresh printing ink. A pack of notebooks of this format, with non-standard markings, was delivered to the local store, Grant's Supply, just a month before the incident, and everything would have looked strange, but understandable, if not for one more circumstance. Under each day in the notebook, there were not just dates, but detailed weather notes, pressure, temperature, wind speed, air humidity. All of them coincided with the data recorded on these days, 5 years before. Example, 17.0785, fog at 0420, biting from 0441 to 0600. 2 strikes, 1 loss, 1 bucket, point below the bridge. The local weather station's archive shows similar readings. Morning fog, air temperature 49 degrees Fahrenheit, pressure consistently low. And one more detail, the bait described in the notebook. An old hook number 6 bait, soft without flavoring, was no longer used by even amateurs at that time. But this is exactly the bait that was found on the fish left in the bucket. 1 hook remained in the mouth. When they took it out, they found traces of fresh water and fingerprints on the bend. They gave an incomplete result for analysis. Too little fat, but the skin type matched the biology of men aged 40 to 50. On the 3rd day, the police returned to the bridge. The objects were still there. The chair was frozen into the bank. The notebook had not been blown away by the wind. Even the bucket had not been moved. Only one thing had changed. On the trunk of a tree, 8 feet from the bank, there was a carved inscription. "Don't follow me. I'm already here." A copy of the same statement, Ellis's family would later confirm, was written in his old journal in 1984, after an unsuccessful night fishing attempt in which he allegedly lost his bearings in a stream. His widow, Margaret, provided the notes. The handwritten letter, 3 hours along the coast, and I still came to the same place, twice. It's better not to go at night. It's all one turn. When copies of both diaries were placed side by side, it became clear that the handwriting was identical. And at that moment, the investigation came across another piece of evidence. An alarm signal from the area was registered in the service database, dated July 16, 1990. It came from a portable radio transmitter used in the 1980s by fisheries inspectors, but there were no other such devices in the area. The signal was short, only 3 seconds, and contained a phrase transmitted over an open frequency. "On the water again. I don't see the car." When we went to the archives, Ellis's car, a 1974 Pontiac Bonneville, was listed as salvaged. But when we questioned one of the employees at the Millbridge junkyard, he said, "We didn't receive it. It never arrived. The number is on the list, but the body itself was missing." On the 4th day after the first alarm, local police contacted the Franklin County Records Office for a complete file on John Ellis. The official version was that he drowned on the evening of July 17, 1985. A witness, his neighbor, Joe Martin, claim to have seen John go fishing in the morning and not return by evening. His body was found 2 days later, stuck under a snag downstream, about 800 yards from the bridge. The cause of death was head trauma from a fall, an accident. He left behind a widow, Margaret, and a brother, Ray Ellis. The brother later left the state and the widow lived alone and avoided any mention of the incident for more than 2 decades, until Officer Jeremy came to her to show her the notebook found near the bridge. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately, but not only that. On the 3rd page, in small letters at the bottom, John had left a note. "Marg, if you read, it still works. Turn towards the bite, not towards the noise." These words refer to John's famous phrase among local fishermen: "Don't go to the sound of the water, go to the bite." He always said that the stream leads not where you can hear, but where you can't hear anything. Against this backdrop, the officers decided to check the perimeter along the creek again, and there, 25 yards from the collapse line of the bridge, one of the volunteers found a submerged fishing license case in the water. It was weighed down by a rock. The paper inside was almost completely decomposed, but through the layer of plastic, you could read the name: Ellis, John, 1990. The license is for the current year, but John officially died 5 years ago. The document was sent for examination. The paper, despite being in water, still retained the structure of the seal. Issued in May 1990, registered in Washington County, not where he had lived before. The signature matches the sample of his driver's license. Meanwhile, a new report came in. A young hunter passing from the south along the creek bed said he heard talking by the water. He stopped. It was early morning, about 5, and he said he heard someone say, "Caught 3. The bucket is almost full. We need to leave earlier. They might come." The voice, as he put it, was muffled, calm, like an old one. But when he came closer, there was no one by the water. There was a bucket, and next to it, bait. The same old hooks and crumb. The police recorded the report, and while they were checking the area, one of the officers raised a question. If John Ellis was really there, then who was lying in the cemetery? Experts opened the case of 1995. The autopsy was conducted without DNA identification, by fingerprints and external signs. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma, probably a rock. The items matched, but the body was found without shoes, although Ellis left in standard waders. In 1985, this point was considered unimportant. Now it has become key. Another question: if he didn't have shoes, why were the footprints at the bridge in July 1990 left in the same shoes? And most importantly, why do the recordings from 1990 have the same structure, the same expressions, the same system of notes, right down to the remark left to the widow? The notebook, flash drive, and license were in the same time period, and the person whose name they bore was considered dead. After confirming the license anomalies, officers decided to conduct covert surveillance on Thompson Creek. On the night of July 20th, 21, An infrared sensor with motion detection was installed, and a night vision camera was installed just upstream. The goal was to record who was leaving the bucket and bait. At the same time, fishery inspectors conducted a test. At the point where the last notebook was found, they placed two types of bait, a modern flavored paste and hand-wrapped crumb. 2 hours later, a bite was recorded on the crumb. But this was not what seemed strange. One of the employees noticed that the hook that worked was not from their set. An old model with a sawed-off barb. It turned out later that such hooks had not been produced since the early 80s. It was thrown carefully and precisely. By morning, the bucket appeared on the bridge again, empty but dry, as if it had just been placed there. Next to it were the same flattened footprints, and everything could have been written off as someone's evil joke if not for the fact that the camera actually worked. The recording shows footage from 4 to 4:20 in the morning. In the first seconds, there is movement from the forest. Through a narrow passage between the trees, someone comes out onto the shore. Height, approximately 5 feet 9 inches. The silhouette is male, in a fishing jacket, cap, unhurried movements. In his hands is an object similar to a fishing rod. He stops at a log, puts something on the ground, presumably a bucket. And here's the key moment. When the figure turns toward the camera, the face is not in the frame. But when you slow down, you can see that the right hand is wrapped in a bandage. A photo of Ellis in 1985, taken a month before his death, had the same feature. He injured his hand by cutting himself on glass. Time of shot, 04:12. 2 minutes later, the figure leaves and never returns. And now comes the coincidence that most excited the investigators. On a page from Ellis's original notebook, dated July 16, 1985, is the following entry. Left at 04:12. Old spot, bucket in place, crumb worked. Same words, same structure, same minute. Officer Jeremy, studying both recordings, asks the question, if it's a coincidence, then it's too precise. And if it's not a coincidence, then who's coming back? And why? Against this background, a new signal comes in. A local fisherman reported seeing a man on the bridge early in the morning between Thursday and Friday. He showed the direction, described his clothes. When asked, "Are you sure you didn't make a mistake?" he replied, "I wouldn't have called if I hadn't heard him say 5 sooner rather than later." This was an expression John Ellis often used in conversation. It was not a general one. It was his personal formula, meaning better to leave at 4 than at 6. Margaret confirmed it. And this very phrase stood at the end of the last page of the new notebook. The handwriting was still the same. On the 6th day after the first call, a group of 3 officers and 2 volunteers decided to search a section of the creek downstream, the same spot where John Ellis's body had been found in 1985. Reports at the time said he had been found in a loop of the creek, stuck face down under a fallen log. He was only discovered because someone had seen his jacket float to the surface. Now this part of the stream has become shallow. The tree was washed away by the flood long ago, and the bottom is covered with dense silt. When the group approached the point, the coordinates of which coincided with the archival records, they saw someone had recently stood in the water. The tracks are clear, directed from the shore to the center of the channel. The depth is just above the ankle, but the water is colder than in any other part of the stream, about 41 degrees Fahrenheit, while upstream and downstream the temperature was around 48. This difference is an anomaly. It could not be related to underground springs. The geology of the site is stable, and there were no such deviations in the reports of previous years. The tracks led to the center, and then they were gone, as if a person had stopped and disappeared. No exit tracks, no trampled grass, just sticky mud with the imprints of soles that matched the size of John Ellis's boots, 9.5 wide foot, worn along the outer edge. Later at headquarters, the volunteers conducted a test. They stood in the same place and tried to repeat the trajectory. But each time there was at least a hint of movement, either on the surface of the water or along the edge of the bank. In the case of those tracks, everything broke off in the middle of the stream. Officer Jeremy insisted on a deep scan. The machine showed a faint reflection, as if there was a solid object in the lower layer of silt. The next day, a diver was sent in. He spent 30 minutes in the area marked by the machine and pulled out one object, a metal box the size of a palm. Inside is a spring lock, rusty but working. When the box was opened, they found the photograph is a yellowed shot of a stream taken from a bridge, a bag of bait, a crumb wrapped in oiled paper, and a paper card with the text, "If you can't find a car, follow the light, not the flow." The phrase was compared with Ellis's notes from 1983. It is there, word for word, in the section July Early Departure. But the real question came the next day. At 6:03 a.m., the camera at the bridge went off again. The frame shows a man in a jacket with his back to the lens, standing by a bucket. He doesn't move. But in the last frame, when the sun is just rising, you can see him turn his head. For a moment, a profile. Gray hair, deep cheekbones, a cap on the back of his head. The photo was shown to Margaret. She looked and said, "It's him, only older, as if he's alive, but another 5 years have passed." When the photograph from the camera was officially compared with the lifetime photographs of John Ellis, experts concluded that the man in the picture really does look very similar. But there are differences that cannot be explained simply by age. His shoulders are set differently, his nasolabial folds have deepened, and his face has a different oval. Experts estimate his age at 55 to 60 years, but the main similarity is not in anatomy, but in behavioral patterns. He is standing in the same place, in the same pose, with the same hand movements as in the 1983 photo of John holding a bucket by the bridge. Even the way he turns his head to the camera is identical. A day later, when the group walked around the creek area again, a volunteer noticed that someone had left a map in a crevice between two tree trunks at the base of the bank. A small sheet, hand-cut with pencil markings. It had no relation to the topographic grid of the county, but coincided with the bed of the stream. On it are marked the points. First bite, double shadow, bridge to the flood, and outlined in bold, line 1980. This caused confusion. The map showed areas that had ceased to exist before the mid-80s, blocked turns, old exits to the shore, even the line of the flooded shore after the spring of 1981. All these elements were removed from the navigation charts back in 1986. No one has used them since then. On the back of the map are notes. They were handwritten with the same spelling mistakes that John often made in his notebooks. The bridge is shaking. It's darker below. I'll try to the left. The bite is an hour later, like that July. The handwriting was identical. The paper was old, but the ink was fresh. We sent it to the lab. They confirmed that the paper material was from the early 1980s, and that production was closed in 1985. And the pen ink was bought recently at a local hardware store. Conclusion: someone took the old map and made new marks. Against the backdrop of these findings, one of the officers raised a question that had previously been considered closed. Could Ellis really have died in 1985? The body was identified visually, by clothing, by belongings. But there was no DNA, no comparison with X-rays. And if someone wanted to disappear, this would be ideal. Water, impact, blurred identification. But the theory collapsed on one fact. After Ellis's death, there were no financial movements, no attempts to hide, no suspicions. It was as if he had truly disappeared. But, and this was decisive, since 1991, there have been 5 reports of night fishermen in the area of the stream who they didn't have time to see, all between 4 and 5 in the morning, all with similar descriptions. And in all cases, the person said the same phrase, "Not here, not towards the current. They're still sleeping." By the morning of July 23rd, exactly 1 week after the first signal, surveillance on the creek had been stepped up. Cameras now covered both sides of the bridge, the shoreline upstream and downstream, and the area where the bait had been found earlier. An infrared motion sensor was also installed, linked to temperature. The setup was simple. If movement with a human thermal signature was detected between 4 and 5 in the morning, the system would begin recording continuously. At 04:03 the next morning, the sensor was triggered. In the frame, a figure appears from the riverbed, goes around a fallen tree on the left, then goes to the bridge. Everything is as usual, but now the camera had a different frequency. The sound was activated by any vibration. And here is a voice, quiet, almost a whisper, but clearly audible. Fog again, turned early. The stream is the same, but the shore is not the same. He puts down the bucket, looks along the riverbed, turns to the bushes, and seems to notice the lens. At this point, the recording ends. The next morning, the camera was switched off. Not damaged. Power supply was normal. It was simply deactivated manually through the internal panel, but it was in a protected case with a lock. It was impossible to open it without a tool. When the officers arrived at the point, the bucket was still there. There was one fish in it, fresh, still warm, and a piece of paper tucked under the lid. A pencil, familiar handwriting, the inscription, "It's not too late if you don't wait for the sun. Look up, not downstream. I'll check again." That same day, a private call came in. A man who declined to give his name said that in 1989, while walking past the same stream at night, he saw a man with a bucket who was standing knee-deep in water and saying that he was retracing the route. At the time, no one attached any significance to it, but he remembered. He had an old audio recording on a cassette tape. He accidentally turned on the recorder in his pocket. They listened to the tape. It contained the sound of water, and then a voice. "If the second point, then there will be no trace. Go not to the fish, to yourself." The signature matched the voice on recent recordings. Everything pointed to the fact. Officer Jeremy wrote the following report. "We have no reason to believe that this is John Ellis, but we have no evidence to contradict it, and we have a complete match between his previous routes and the actions of the unknown." In August, the area near the creek was closed to tourists. The cameras were removed. The report was sent to the county archive. The official version: an area with limited access due to unstable soil. But every year, in July, someone still leaves a notebook with notes: date, pressure, bait, bite. Always with the same signature: "Gee, I'll come back if I don't get the wrong shore."